So after about a month at the psych war office, you were transferred upwards again, and this time to the foreign ministry.
Yes.
And what was your position and your duties there?
Again, without my knowledge, I received the order to report to the foreign ministry, and I was, to my surprise, uh, promoted to Director of American Affairs. Surprised, it was the most important department in the foreign ministry. And yes, I was happy to take the, the, the order and execute it. And the work was really important. Uh, since the United States was the number one ally of Vietnam, the most important country in the world for Vietnam. That was our where the money came from, to say it in raw terms. So my directorate was in charge of uh, processing all reports from all our embassies in North, Central, and South America. All those reports went to my desk, and my staff, yes, I had the staff of all the Foreign Service officers processing the reports, uh, making the report shorter in maybe about a page long for the foreign minister to read. He couldn't read a million pages, so make it shorter, like the way we treat Donald Trump, one page. And we had to add our comments, our opinion. Uh, we had to explain things to the foreign minister because the foreign minister was a politician. He didn't know much in diplomacy. Professionals run the place, just like here in any country. So every morning, all the directors, Asia, Africa, Europe, all the directors met with the foreign minister, and we briefed the foreign minister about our area of responsibility. That's our word, area of responsibility. So I briefed him about American affairs. Of course, we receive intelligence reports, and yes, I was trained in intelligence by the Vietnamese CIA. Uh, that's done by every embassy of every country in the world. It's in the open. So it was exciting to know all about America.
So you were learning about the back scene of what was going on in the American administration at this time.
Yes.
I see. So this was 68, 69?
Yes.
Right. You were sent back to Washington, D.C. for a second tour, and this time you were the second and first secretary for Educational and Cultural Affairs. So you were in the U.S. from 1969 to 1973, which was a very tumultuous time. Um, Despite that, did you enjoy your time in America? And did you come to feel at home here?
First, I felt at home already. The second time I was back in Washington D.C., everything was familiar except the political atmosphere was different. The anti-war movement was tremendous, and it was difficult for me as a professional diplomat. But first, speaking about life in Washington, yes, I enjoyed the diplomatic life. I work hard, and I must attend receptions and banquets in the evening. That was work, not fun. And then I had to work on weekends, work all the time. And that was the so-called fun part of diplomatic life. And the office part was the paperwork to help the Vietnamese students in the States. And I know that I had to work with children, with the rich and powerful people in Vietnam. Only those people could send their children overseas for an education. First, I must be very careful in treating those young people because they had powerful, rich, wealthy, famous parents. And I had to sign a lot of paperwork. The bureaucracy was terrible. The most important part was the transfer of American dollars from Vietnam to the United States to support those students. And I know, but I kept quiet, that those parents were not clean. How could a general or a cabinet minister have enough money to send their children to America? Their salary was $50 a month, $100 a month. But I know, and everybody know, and it was a national sport. Nobody blew any whistle. I didn't blow any whistle. I just took care of the children. Now the hard part was to deal with the anti-war movement. I must go to different universities to talk to the students to defend the Vietnam War. It was tough, very tough. American students are free to talk. The Vietnamese students in Vietnam were not free to talk because in a war there was no such thing as freedom. So it was very hard to try to talk to those American students. They asked questions and I had canned answers, ready-made answers. Without those canned answers, I would be a dumb and blind diplomat. So I had ready-made answers for every question. And I wouldn't say that I lied, but I didn't tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And anyway, I like it to meet young people and talk. Sometimes it was not very nice to be there because on the plain clothes policemen were all around protecting me. It was not a very nice atmosphere to have around policemen and plenty of people, and wherever I went, there was a police car escorting me. It was not nice.
Mm.
Yes, but I survived. I learned a lot on the job.
So at the end of your tour in 1973, you were reassigned to the Foreign Ministry in Saigon. 4 more years of war had elapsed since your last visit in Saigon. In what state did you find the city?
The city was pretty calm, but there was one absence, the big absence. American troops, they were gone. They were withdrawn in 1972. Vietnam was then all by itself. And I could tell right away that Vietnam was doomed. Uh, although Nixon promised to continue assistance to Vietnam, but the US Congress already voted no more assistance to Vietnam. So we were fighting the war on our own, and we had our bullets and cannonballs rationed. If we run out of bullets, we run. Then there were no more bullets to shoot. So there was no shame to run.
Mm. What was the morale like in the Foreign
Uh,
Office at this point? The Foreign
in the
Ministry?
Foreign Office,
The Foreign Ministry, yes.
again, we didn't talk much, really, or maybe I did not talk much. It was no need to talk. We knew, everybody knew that the Americans were no longer with us. We still had American advisors, but they were not combat officers. They couldn't do anything. They just stay in the barracks or behind their desk to advise us. And by then we really didn't need much advice. We learned a lot from the war already.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the rotation of tour of duty for American officers, the new officers had to learn from us instead of we learn from them.
Mm.
So it was the cart before the ox.
Mm. So in 1975, you were moved upwards again to the Prime Minister's office, where you were the director of protocol. And there you worked beside the Prime Minister on an almost daily basis.
Yes. To my surprise, I received the order to report to the Prime Minister's office. Okay, I reported without knowing what to do. And I was there as director of protocol. And I had never worked in protocol. I didn't know what to do. So I had to learn fast, very fast. Yes, we have books, textbooks, and all kinds of books in the foreign ministry, and I learn fast, and I know how to organize the easy thing, a reception, a banquet. The staff knew everything to do. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to tell them what to do. They know everything already. So I was just there, just a big boss. That was the easy part. The next easy part was the ceremonies. There were so many of them, signing this, signing that, just like Donald Trump signing his executive orders and so it. Yes, we did that. Donald Trump could do that. I could do that too. And yeah, I just make sure that all the documents were okay. And I just want him to make sure that the Prime Minister must sign here at the X. That was easy. And I must know that, yeah, the cabinet ministers must stand here or sit there, or this general must sit here, and that general must sit in the back behind the colonel. And that was a a big shock to the generals who sat in the back, just a small thing, because the colonel was the commander of the Marine Corps, and the general was a desk officer. Therefore, the general was nothing. He must sit behind the colonel. Yes, they gave me trouble too. They asked why, Mr. Director, why? I have to explain. Yeah, it was fun too. And I had to work out of uniform because I worked with colonels and generals. And how could a first lieutenant tell the general to sit here, general? He would send me to the front. Okay, so I was out of uniform, gladly out of uniform. And I was expecting to be promoted to captain when the Vietnam War ended.
So let's turn to the end. In February of 1975, North Vietnam launched an all-out offensive and moved in a united front from the demilitarized zone southward, and everyone knew it was the end.
Yes.
An American colleague came to your desk and said, "You must evacuate." And you said no at first. Why?
Let's go back to the beginning of the offensive. According to the communist strategy, they must wage a guerrilla warfare as long as possible to tire out the Americans. And then they needed time to go conventional. It took time for China and the Soviet Union to send all the necessary equipment to North Vietnam. So when the US Congress signed what they call the law or whatever it was to stop sending assistance to Vietnam, the North Vietnamese knew it was the time to pounce on us. So they sent they went all conventional. They fought in the open. They used the tactics of the Nazi Germans by sending all their tanks to South Vietnam. There were columns and columns of tanks going down the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos to Central Vietnam to South Vietnam. The Vietnamese Air Force didn't have fuel to fly their planes, and the Americans were no longer there to help us. We ran. The foot soldiers from North Vietnam just crossed the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between North and South Vietnam. They just walked south openly. Nobody hurt them. And the South Vietnamese ran because they ran out of bullets. And my brother-in-law said his tank didn't have any cannonballs. So what could he do? At first, I thought as if I was an American. How come the South Vietnamese ran away? I didn't know anything about the shortage of equipment and weapons until my brothers told me so. And I understood, yes, I shouldn't look down on the South Vietnamese.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So in that context, when it was clear that it was the end, why did you say no when you were offered to evacuate?
That's where when the Americans decided to evacuate, first they had to take care of American citizens. So the Americans started to leave Vietnam discreetly. They didn't want the Vietnamese to know that they were leaving in order to avoid a panic among the Vietnamese. So my American colleagues returned to Saigon. One of them had a bandaged eye. He was the consul in Da Nang, Central Vietnam. Before the other Vietnamese could evacuate, the Americans approached me first. And that consul came to my office and told me to go. Anytime I wanted, they were ready to pick me up. I said no. And I didn't want to leave because if I did, I would be a deserter. And I was an army officer. I could not desert. And I was a civil servant. I couldn't leave my country like that. I couldn't be a defector. So, okay, he left. And he left Vietnam because he was sent back to Guam to take care of the refugees coming to Guam later. So a second time, another diplomat, American diplomat, called me and told me to leave. I said no, I couldn't leave. An unknown American diplomat, I still remember his name, Joe McBride. He called me, he said, Minh, it's time to go. It sounded like an order. And I sensed that it was an order. He told me to report to an address in the morning, and I said yes. I knew it was time to go. In the morning, I reported to that address, and there were many American diplomats there, and they wouldn't let me go home. I said I wanted to go home to take my family with me. They said, no. I called my family from there, from the safe house. I called all my brothers, my parents, and I told them, time to go, come to this address right away. And my number 2 brother came. He was the first to respond because he was scared to death. He was a captain and an intelligence officer. The communists wouldn't let him live if he was captured. So he was the first. The second one was a first lieutenant, the PhD in marine biology. He was the second fellow, number 5, number 5 brother. And the next was number 7 brother, the medical doctor. He was also a first lieutenant, but he was quite safe because he was not on the front line. He was practically blind. And yeah, he is in this picture. This is the one practically blind. So, okay, he was the next. And then I have to add the wife of brother number 2, the captain. She was a lawyer. She was ready to go. Although her family was on the other side, but she was glad to go. She knew firsthand. I might be going too far, be ahead of your question if I say that all my brothers and I ended up at that safe house address, and I still refused to go. I saw that my American colleagues were very busy running around town, and I asked, and I was allowed to join them. So I joined one of the teams, and I was issued American credentials, and I drove my own car in the city to contact Vietnamese families that the Americans wanted to evacuate from Vietnam. The decisions was made by the Americans, not by me. I just did what they requested me to do, and I was glad to help. But what I was doing was quite dangerous for me. If I was left behind and I was captured by the communists, I wouldn't survive. So it was about just 3 days. Yeah, I did it for 3 days until the last day of the war, when the communists were all around Saigon. It was time to go. I was driven to Saigon airport by an American Embassy van. I was dropped off at the what we call the DAO compound, Defense the Defense Attaché office. There was a huge American compound at the airport. By then, there were already 7,000 Vietnamese in the compound to be evacuated. I left the compound in the evening of the 28th of April. I was in an American Army van, Army bus on the way to the runway where American C-130 planes were waiting. But we were not out of the compound yet when the first rocket exploded right about 100 yards from the bus. And so everybody ran to the trenches. I spent one night in the trench, no food, no drink. The whole day, the following day in the trench, no food, no drink. In the meanwhile, the North Vietnamese bombarded the airport. Rockets and artillery rounds all for a full night and full day. We were under attack. And by then, no American planes could land. So the Americans had to cut down all the arms, all the trees in the compound to let helicopters land. So the helicopters from the 7th Fleet out in the Pacific of Vietnam landed, and I was picked by one of those helicopters. We flew to the fleet. On the way to the fleet, the South Vietnamese soldiers shot at us. They were angry because the Americans were abandoning them. Fortunately, we didn't get hit. My helicopter landed on the aircraft carrier USS Midway. And right after my arrival, the Vice President, Air Vice Marshal Nguyen Cao Kỳ, flew his own helicopter and landed on the Midway. He was a flamboyant officer, still with his purple scarf around his neck. Everybody hated him. He was once a prime minister, and I served under him. His helicopter was immediately pushed overboard. All the Vietnamese helicopters, they came like birds, like butterflies, all over. They were up in the sky. So they waited for their turn to land on the aircraft carrier. All the helicopters were pushed overboard to make room for American helicopters, because American helicopters were full of Vietnamese refugees. It was quite a scene. One of the Vietnamese helicopters ran out of fuel, so the poor pilot abandoned the helicopter mid-air and jumped into the sea. Yeah, we rescued him. And another pilot could take his family with him in the helicopter. So he landed enough to let his family jump onto the landing zone of the helicopter. And he flew his hair, because the helicopter was too big, he flew the helicopter away from the carrier and abandoned the helicopter and jumped into the water. And it was what I seen. It was chaos, but organized chaos.
Yeah. So meanwhile, some of your family was still back in Vietnam. Your parents, at least one of your brothers, your sisters.
Yes. My parents stayed behind. Two of my sisters volunteered to remain behind to take care of my parents. And also, their husbands were not home. The tank commander was still fighting in the Mekong Delta. The other brother-in-law, he was already cuckoo. He was a prisoner of war of the communists in Cambodia. That was PTSD. And the other brother, the one who got stuck in Vietnam, he was the other MD in the family, and he was a major. He was caught in Tay Ninh. That's a city on the Cambodian border. He couldn't go home. And I have here a picture of him with two emaciated Vietnamese children in a bigger battle. That was the Battle of An Loc, ANLOC, also on the Cambodian border. And of course, he couldn't go home. When I became an American citizen, I sponsored him to come to the US. The communists said no, he was a doctor, he was needed in Vietnam. So he was stuck.
And your parents?
My parents got old and sick. My mother was diabetic, no medicine, of course. My father, he was, I would say, broken, morally broken. Before the end of the war, he was anti-French, deep in the anti-French underground, but he was not a communist. But I suspect that he was pro or a sympathizer, a pro-communist or a communist sympathizer, or maybe just a social person. He said, yes, we can live with the communists. I know that he was willing to live with the communists and try to survive. But he told my brother-in-law, the cuckoo one, that the communists went too far. He couldn't take it anymore and he died.